Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this panel. We'll wait about a minute or so for people to trickle in, and then we'll get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this panel. I'm Alana Hernandez, former assistant curator here at MCASD. I'm pleased to moderate this panel this evening. Before we begin, I want to take the time to acknowledge that from my location here in Central Phoenix, I'm on the traditional territory of the 𝘚𝘍𝘮𝘳𝘳. The location of the museum at both its downtown and La Jolla locations are located on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. By offering this land acknowledgement, we celebrate vital contributions and rich cultural traditions of both the 𝘚𝘍𝘮𝘳𝘳 and the Kumeyaay. This acknowledgement represents a first step towards working with Indigenous communities in the museum's region and its call to continue dismantling colonial systems that harm Indigenous communities. Now, I encourage all of you to take a moment to consider the ancestral home for which you currently reside. In the chat, we will drop a link to an interactive map that locates a territory which you are currently located on. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We are here on the occasion of the exhibition Experiments on Stone for Women Artists from the Tamarind Lithography Workshop. You can see this exhibition that's currently on view digitally at mcasd.org/EOS. The exhibition brought together 4 artists, Anni Albers, Ruth Asawa, Gego, and Louise Nevelson, who each completed a 2-month residency at the Tamarind Lithography Workshop. If we go to the next slide, there's some graphic as I'm talking about this. Importantly, these artists all worked primarily in media outside of printmaking for a majority of their careers. It was really at the Tamarind Fellowship that each artist was able to push lithography perhaps past a 2-dimensional surface. Though each artist didn't overlap with each other, the connective thread throughout the exhibition really is the workshop itself. With that, I am pleased to introduce my fellow speakers tonight. We'll hear brief presentations from 3 of my wonderful colleagues, Diana Gaston, director at the Tamarind Institute, New Mexico, Marvella Muro, Director of Artistic Programs and Education at Self-Help Graphics in Los Angeles, and Sarah Plummer, printer at Gemini G.E.L. Directly following each of the presentations, we'll jump into conversation. Please, I encourage everyone that's watching tonight to please utilize the Q&A function. So when we get to our conversation, we can answer your questions to have a more dynamic conversation. First up, we have Diana Gaston. Diana, I am going to read a brief bio and then she will get into her presentation. Diana Gaston is the 4th director of Tamarind Institute. Previously, she was a lead curator for Fidelity Investments corporate art collection based in Boston. Diana has a comprehensive knowledge of Tamarind's vast archives housed in the University of New Mexico Art Museum, where she was a curator of prints and photographs from 1989 to 1993. Subsequently, she held positions as curator at the Museum of Photographic Arts in San Diego and associate director of the San Francisco Camera Work. She received her BA in 1985 and MA in 1988 in art history from the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas, where she focused on post-war American photography and contemporary works on paper. Her early training included museum studies programs at the National Museum of American Art, Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and NEA internship at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. She has authored numerous catalog essays, reviews, and articles, most recently contributing the introduction for the monograph Unfolding, the Paper, Art, and Science of Matthew Schielion. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Diana, and she can walk us through the history of Tamarind and some more exciting tidbits. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, and thanks to the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego and to Alana Hernandez for bringing new light to these gorgeous lithographs from Tamarind's early years. So I'll just jump right into it. The 1960s marked a period of great innovation and growth in American printmaking. A wave of new workshops and skilled printers ignited a new era of potential for the medium. And this period is described as a kind of print renaissance. June Wayne anticipated this in her 1959 proposal to the Ford Foundation to fund a new workshop in Los Angeles. As she wrote, "A handful of creative people is all that is needed for a renaissance in the art. If that handful comes together at the right time in the right place." From the outset, June Wayne imagined a program of national reach and Tamarind as a catalyst to restore an environment in which printmaking could thrive. If I could have the next slide. Over a 5-year period, 3 key workshops opened on the East Coast and the West Coast: ULAE, Tamarind, and Crown Point Press. These 3 workshops were founded and directed by women, and of the trio, only Kathleen Brown of Crown Point was a printer. ULAE had the brilliant master printer Robert Blackburn in the workshop during the early years. Tamarind had master printer 𝘚𝘵𝘰𝘮𝘳𝘪𝘮𝘰𝘮, Erwin Hollander, and Ken Tyler. These 3 storied workshops set the standard for post-war printmaking in America and continue to operate today. The next slide. The setting of Los Angeles during the 60s had an enormous influence on Tamarind's early years. Tamarind was referred to by one critic as operating from a Hollywood backwater. Yet Wayne recognized that the city brought cultural, economic, and technological influence and an atmosphere of possibility that made this experiment work. Today, Tamarind continues very much the same objectives as a unique educational print center with the only printer training program of its kind in the world. We focus in on cultivating the technical and collaborative skills of the printer to achieve the vision of the artist. This exchange is what we think of as collaborative printmaking. Some artists look to the printer for technical guidance and emotional support in trying a new medium. Others work very independently, and truly the connection to the printer is unique with each artist. The idea is to foster an environment where the artist feels completely supported, experimentation is encouraged, and artists can realize their best work. Tamarind was instrumental in developing this approach and defining the role of the collaborating printer. We continue this approach today through our publishing program and educational mission. If I could have the next slide. Early on, Tamarind brought a holistic approach to the concept of the professional workshop. The Tamarind Way created standards for print documentation and a model for a self-sustaining workshop. Many of these practices are now implemented in workshops around the world. During the first 2 decades, the Tamarind trained printers shown here established or contributed to major workshops and energized contemporary printmaking. While in many ways the Tamarind printer training program was a great success, we can't point to much diversity in the workshop during this phase. While there were many women who participated as artist fellows, women were openly discouraged from participating in the printer training program during the first decade, and were instead politely redirected to the curatorial training program. During the first decade, to my knowledge, Tamarind trained just one Black master printer, John Dowell, who is Professor Emeritus of Printmaking at the Tyler School of Art at Temple University. And the first woman to achieve the status of master printer was Judith Solotkin, who completed her training in 1974. And the next slide. For the first decade, Tamarind awarded artist fellowships. Typically, artists came to the LA workshop for 2 to 3 months and worked with a team of printers. Artists were nominated by a national committee. Emphasis was on bringing established artists to the workshop. Diversity of style, geographic location, and reputation were the main criteria in artist selection, with the possibilities of what the medium of lithography could do as the workshop's primary focus. During the early years, Joyce Tremaine, we see in the upper left corner, was the first woman nominated by the committee. Ruth Asawa was recommended by her former mentor and fellow artist Joseph Albers, and Louise Nevelson was encouraged by her friend and colleague June Wayne to just escape New York for a bit and restore her creative energy in Los Angeles. The next slide. Louise Nevelson first came to Tamarind in 1963, and over her shoulder in the background, you can see John Dowell working in the corner there. Her innovative approach to printmaking often centered around textiles and surface and the physical process of layering and building a printing matrix. The velvety black lithographs from this first Tamarind collaboration echo the artist's work as a sculptor, and her use of surface and depth and spaces defined by deep matte blacks. The next slide. When Nevelson returned to Tamarind in the 1970s, the workshop, now located in New Mexico, she worked with a different team of printers in a different workshop environment. Here she is with printer 𝘚𝘵𝘰𝘯𝘵, who went on to establish Angelus Press in LA. Looking at how they are both talking with their hands, using gestures to convey mark making and process. This collaboration seems in great contrast to how Nevelson described her reluctance to embrace engraving tools when she first made prints at Atelier 17 in New York, saying, "I didn't want to be what you call an expert in all those tools." It reminded me of a very recent project with artist Rose B. Simpson, who you see on the right. Our master printer Valkyrie Remling responded to how Rose uses her hands to build her ceramic sculpture and how adept she is with a whole range of very physical processes. So after watching her experiment with various drawing tools, the printers encouraged the artist to use her hands in a familiar way to create a print matrix. She ended up shaping and incising and layering paper and other materials to render one of her imposing figures. The other addition we made at Tamarind with her was hand-drawn, so we didn't entirely deprive her of a more traditional response to the medium. Our printers are constantly observing how an artist moves, how they gravitate to tools and handle materials, all with the intent of meeting the artist's ideas for the collaboration with a technical solution. In the next slide. By 1970, Tamarind Lithography Workshop had trained well over 50 master printers and had come to the end of its decade-long experiment to revive the art of lithography. With the support of the Ford Foundation, Tamarind relocated to Albuquerque. Situated now with the resources and oversight of a major research university in a freestanding building off Route 66, with Clinton Adams as director, Tamarind Lithography Workshop became Tamarind Institute. During this transition, Tamarind expanded into publishing, developed a gallery program to facilitate print sales, established a formal print archive with the University of New Mexico Art Museum, and brought more diversity to the workshop. In the next slide. The educational mission remains central to Tamarind. The textbook that Tamarind published in 1971, with an updated and revised edition published in 2009, remains the central text on lithography and still shows up in workshops around the globe. It is referred to by printers only half jokingly as the Bible. Sharing this level of research and technical information was unprecedented up until this time, and Tamarind remains active in conducting research, maintaining a vigilant watch over materials and resources, and sharing this information with the print community. Tamarind has an unexpected and entrepreneurial vein running through its history as well, as the great visionary June Wayne anticipated many of the conceptual and logistical challenges to building a market for contemporary prints, and also the complexity of operating a sustainable workshop. She shared this research too. Next slide. The founding principles of Tamarind continue to guide our mission, and the main focus of our operation are in these areas: collaboration and publishing with invited artists, a rigorous educational program with global reach, programs to engage the public and cultivate collectors, and providing resources and community for printmakers. Tamarind has a long history of seeking out diverse artists, and today we continue this approach, inviting collaborations with artists of different generations and creative disciplines, women and BIPOC artists, regional and international artists, and artists who are experienced printmakers, and also those who are completely new to a collaborative way of working. And the next slide. In closing, I want to underscore the importance of more diversity in printmaking and considering the whole ecosystem that June Wayne first envisioned that is necessary to keep printmaking thriving. Tamarind is part of this creative ecosystem. Tamarind trained printers go on to establish their own workshops and introduce contemporary artists to the art form. Tamarind printers promote collaborative printmaking and print history as educators, mentors, and university administrators. And Tamarind trained printers work in established print workshops around the world. Tamarind is a critical entry point to the larger print community, and it is essential that we all contribute to diversifying the pool of skilled printers and print experts who will move the medium forward. This could be another tipping point for the field in general, especially among a younger generation of digital natives who are more likely to experience images on screen than ink on paper. And it requires a new kind of print advocacy and awareness if we are to sustain the print community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. That was great. I am now pleased to introduce our second panelist, Marvella Muro. Marvella Muro is the Director in Artistic Programs and Education at Self Help Graphics in Los Angeles. She spearheads the long-standing professional print program, Barrio Mobile Art Studio, BMAS, and Self Help Graphics multifaceted art and education programs. Since joining in 2019, she has curated ateliers and special projects in self-help graphics renowned Serigraph Studio, established the arts community to guide its monthly Artist Lab series. She also restructured its Artist in Residence program, now called Beyond the Press, inviting multidisciplinary artists to create a body of work with or guided by self-help graphics community. As a head of education, she launched a youth community and creative lab partnership with a neighboring high school. She was formerly the community engagement manager at LACMA, developing and executing art programs with community partners and artists in Compton, North Hollywood, and East Los Angeles. Prior to joining the education team, she had various curatorial roles at LACMA and was the executive assistant and project manager at the USC Pacific Asian Museum in Pasadena. She has a BA in art history from Cal State University Fullerton and an MA in arts management from Goucher College in Maryland. So with that, I'm excited to turn it over to Marvella.
Thank you, Alana, and thank you to the Museum of Contemporary Art at San Diego. I'm joining you from Apachangna, currently known as Los Angeles, home to the original peoples of this territory, the 𝘚𝘵𝘰, 𝘠𝘢𝑚𝑎sh, and 𝑡𝑡𝑎𝑣𝑦𝑎𝑚. I joined Self Help Graphics in 2019, and I've been working closely with the master printers, and now it's 𝘚𝘵𝘰𝘯𝑥, the newly appointed master printer at Self Help Graphics, who has been part of the organization for about 19 years. A few of the ateliers that I coordinated or completed include Utopia Dystopia that included 26 artists, an atelier addressing the census, some independent projects with Judith Hernandez, Patsy Valdez, and we're just completing, we'll be completing next week an atelier with 7 artists who are also military veterans. Second slide, please. So self-help graphics and art emerged out of the inspiration and energies of a group of artists and printmakers. This includes Sister Karen Bocalero from the Order of St. Francis, and Carlos Bueno and Antonio Ibañez, a queer couple from Mexico. Both, again, the three of them printmakers and artists. An informal studio formed in Sister Karen's garage, welcoming local artists. Sister Karen was an established printmaker and studied under the other great printmaker, Corita Kent. And in 1970, the group formed Art Inc. And by 1973, the organization was established as a 501c3, becoming formally Self-Help Graphics and Art. We've had a few homes throughout the year. We started on the second floor of a small law firm on Cesar Chavez, which is formerly known as Brooklyn Avenue, and then moved to the third home, also on Cesar Chavez in 1979, where we were established there for about a little over 30 years. It's important to address and highlight the relationship that was established with UC Santa Barbara in 1986 at their department called the California and Ethnic Multicultural Archives. This CIMA houses 2 editions of every print that has been created in the serigraph studio. They also house all the ephemera that includes photography to like grant writing documentation to letters written within each other with different artists, as well as the early stages of the Barrio Mobile Art Studio. So it's a great resource, and it's the most sought after archive at UC Santa Barbara, used by the students and the staff and other academics. In 2011, we moved to our current location on First Street in Boyle Heights. And in 2018, we successfully purchased the building, which is a big accomplishment for a small organization, a Latinx organization. Since its foundation, Self-Help Graphics continues to be rooted in community, using art to address social justice issues. You can see this through our prints, exhibitions, educational programs, or collaborative work with community partners. Topics such as Vietnam, police brutality, identity, decolonization, to the ongoing subject of war, immigration, gentrification, and environment and displacement. The third slide, please. Going to the back to the studio and focusing on the studio. These are a few images of Sister Karen and the first atelier that was created at Self-Help Graphics on the right-hand side. So after a few years of printing in the studio and then in the new building, the first formal atelier took place in 1983. And that was led by master printer, Stephen Grace, who was with the organization, I'm going to say about 5 or 6 years, and hence establishing the professional print program, which we still run today. The goal of the program is to offer artists with various experiences the opportunity to experiment and create fine art limited edition prints through a peer-led approach. Each artist works side by side with a master printer for 7 days in the studio. Prior to joining Self-Help Graphics, the artists were with the master printer for 5 days only. Artists are encouraged to use traditional painting techniques and also to experiment with text, digital, and photo manipulation, and more. But to this day, many of the artists do continue to hand draw each layer. So it's really nice, and we encourage that to continue to happen. So the right side, the image on the right side is Sister Karen Bocalero speaking to a group of artists that are part of 2 ateliers. Each atelier included about 10 or 11 artists. We reduced that to 7 artists just to be able to, because of time constraints and just availability, and it's easier to manage. Can you follow the, go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Yeah, this is a few images from the first atelier, which you'll see that Sister Karen also is participated, and you saw the image of her and Stephen Grace in the previous slide. As part of the professional printmaking program, each artist receives 50% of their edition and artist proofs. And this was established to create a method for artists to have some income. And two of those from two prints from the edition go to the 𝘚𝘰𝘶𝘬 archives. Sister Karen was notorious for making prints affordable, and I think to the determinant of self-help graphics and to the artists themselves, but it was just her goal of making art accessible to the community. Two ateliers are curated each year, and about 7 artists are included in each atelier, and we continue to do independent projects. In addition to Stephen Grace, we've had other master printers include 𝘍𝘍𝘰𝘮𝘳 and 𝘧𝘳𝘰𝘮𝘀𝘍𝘍. And I believe we've had other printers come in, master printers come in to do independent projects, including 𝘧𝘳𝘰𝘮𝘳's brother, Richard 𝘧𝘍𝘍. On the next slide. And here's a few more images of the first atelier, just to show an array of styles and expressions that all of the artists that participated in the first atelier. If you can go to the next slide, please. So following tradition, prior to the artist's time in the studio, the group of artists, the master printer and I meet to get to know each other, and the artist also talk about their practice. So that's the example of Sister Karen speaking with that large group. In those meetings, in that meeting, the expectations and are set, the atelier's theme is discussed, and we just also discuss different approaches to the work. After a few artists print in the studio, we follow up with a discussion and to provide peer-to-peer conversations and collaboration. Again, these meetings are held with the intention of creating mentorship opportunities and exchanging of ideas. Which brings us forth to, this brings me forward to the topic of women in print. So although print studios have been a male-dominant space, self-help graphics has had a history of inviting an array of amazing female artists in the studio. I'm not sure if it's due to Sister Karen's leadership and presence, but it was not until 1999 when a former director invited Irene Cervantes to curate an all-women's atelier titled Maestras. This atelier included an intergenerational group of artists with diverse styles, expressions, and experiences in print. Irene did not want to define one theme and offered 3, and 2 of which, if you can change to the next slide, please. 2 of which are spirituality and identity. And the image on the right-hand side by Fabiana Rodriguez is a print. Fabiana was a student of Irene, but it was also learning from peer-to-peer as well. So it was mentorship and peer-to-peer, as Fabiana was really versed in digital images, and so she included that and actually provided that support to some other artists in the group. We can go to the next slide, please. So a second atelier, Maestras Atelier, was created in 2001, and this past year, and finalizing this year, our 3rd iteration of Maestras was completed. As you see now, we're using Maestras with an X to just reflect the people, the artists who, and our times today as we identify ourselves. Again, it's a multi-generational group of artists with diverse practices, It was a very big challenge with the epidemic, but we managed to pull together such a beautiful work of art. And as you see in the center picture, Irena Cervantes is also guiding this atelier, but it's curated by Rosalie Lopez, another artist from, actually, I think she's from Albuquerque and has been living in Los Angeles for a long time. So we have Star Montana, who's a photographer, Ivy also, Ortiz, also a photographer, Gabriela Rodriguez, who is a painter, and Yaneli Delgado, who is focuses on relief printmaking. So it's been wonderful to see them. And here in the image, you'll see the group coming together and having one of the discussions after 3 of the artists created the prints for the atelier. As we look towards the future, I do want to say that in June, we will be unveiling the prints for the Maestras Atelier as on our annual print fair. And so as we look to the future, we hope to make the inventory of prints available to view and study for the local community, and also establish an apprenticeship program in the studio, possibly through partnerships with neighboring colleges or universities. We've also established a few years ago a print summit, a biennial print summit, again, for the purpose of introducing people to the medium, engaging multicultural, multi-generational audiences, established printers, new people to the process, educators and students. It's important for us to maintain the studio open to new generations of artists and printmakers through mentorship and skill building opportunities. I believe, and we believe, that that is how our practice remains relevant and innovative. Thank you.
Thank you, Marvella. And then finally, we have, I'm pleased to present Sarah Plummer, our printer, on the panel to hear her perspective. Sarah Plummer is a collaborative printer, lately of Australia, more recently California. She was raised in Sydney and moved to the US to attend the Rhode Island School of Design before completing Tamarind Institute's professional printer training program for collaborative lithography. Sarah's captivated by the alchemic expanse of lithography and finds the opportunity to bring well-honored, innovative approaches to artists and their work as one of the greatest pleasures. She currently works as a printer at Gemini G.E.L. So without further ado, please welcome Sarah.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I would like to just start by acknowledging the 𝘚𝘵𝘰𝘮𝘳𝘢 𝘞𝘰𝘮 people as the owners of the land where I live and work in Los Angeles. As has been mentioned, I am a Tamarind trained printer and I'm a lithographer at Gemini G.E.L. I want to just start by jumping right in, if we can go to the next slide, by talking about Tacita Dean. So following a residency at the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles in 2015, Tacita created the lithographic series 𝘍𝘰𝘮𝘀 at Gemini G.E.L in collaboration with printers Rachel Reed, Jennifer Turner, and 𝘧𝘳𝘰𝘮𝘀𝘀 Montoya. Following 𝘍𝘰𝘮𝘀, Tacita worked with our printers to create the series that is currently being editioned in the workshop. Although there have been some shifts in the conception, since the conception of this series, we still are a team of 4 female printers, master printer Jill Lerner, printers 𝘧𝘳𝘰𝘮𝘀 Montoya, Stacy Smith, and myself. Now, when a printer or a team of printers inherits a workshop that had formerly been run by or designed for male printers, questions arise around the built environment and how our bodies meet the world and that space. How do spaces and tools silently define what is able and normative? Or what kind of physical capacity is expected of a fine art printer. Diana shed some light on this in her discussion of the rigidity around accepting or denying female printers in the early days at Tamarind. So I think it's interesting to reflect on this in light of the last year, since so many shared spaces were forced to mobilize and make accommodations that would meet CDC standards of safety. For COVID, these protocols were maintained precisely because we were all at risk. Now, I would like to suggest that such accommodations really are no different from broader accessibility standards in terms of function. They're implemented to make a space workable for as many people as possible and to take collective wellness into account. People with disabilities know that such things are not an issue of an individual's inability or limitation, but rather unadaptive policies and practices. In the same way that we cannot reasonably expect that anyone's body would have resisted a highly contagious disease, we ought to extend this thinking to matters that concern the body, since especially for printers, our body is just as important of a tool as the press. So if we can go to the next slide, please. The scale of these prints that we're working on requires 2 printers and 1 print assist. So 1 printer on either side of this 40-pound roller that you see, while a 3rd person dampens the plate just ahead of each pass. In a print shop, collaboration is happening twofold. Now, of course, we're here to talk about collaboration between the artist and the printer, but I feel that it's very important to highlight first that collaboration is happening constantly between printers at the press. When you're on press with 2 other printers, the synchronicity and interdependence that exists is bodily and absolutely essential. While the idea of people working together to achieve mutual success has been normalized in most professional settings, creative or otherwise, the word collaboration often can elicit misconceptions around authority and agency. So up on this slide, I have photographs both from the printing of LA Exuberance up in the left-hand corner, Jennifer Turner, Rachel Reed, and 𝘧𝘰𝘮𝘳𝘠 Montoya, who is still a part of our team. And then on the right, we have master printer Jill Lerner and Stacy Smith, and then myself down below. I chose these photos specifically not only to show the scale of the operation, but also to demonstrate the necessary versatility and role switching that happens in the shop to support one another on any given day. Sometimes I might be sponging, I might be rolling, I might be prepping paper or graining stones. So essentially the message is that no story of success has ever really been of one individual overcoming limitations. Success in the workshop is necessarily webbed, not just between printer and artist, but also printer and printer. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I have some photos from my printer training at Tamarind. As you can see up in the left-hand corner, among my colleagues, 7 out of 8 of us were women. And Andrew is just as pretty much as good as they come in terms of men. I have also included photos from a collaboration with artist Christine Baudet and my fellow printer Irene and myself. So the reason I wanted to speak first about printer-to-printer collab is that I believe the printer-artist relationship also has the potential to function as a platform for access and diversity. However, this cannot happen before we're able to dismantle attitudinal barriers at the press. Historically, there's been a lot of machismo and stoicism attached to the duties of the printer. And it is an extremely physical and labor-intensive profession. but there are far more important skills that define a good collaborator. For example, the ability to listen and communicate well, to intuit certain needs and desires of your artist, to match or complement them energetically or in such a way that supports their process. So in other words, there are a lot of human skills that come into play that have nothing to do with one's ability to print for a long period of time or move a heavy stone. I would actually argue that emotional stamina is far more important than physical stamina at the press. It needn't be said that access is an intersectional issue, and I'm sure that's something that we'll be able to talk about in the conversation after. But I would like to finish with the idea that the very nature of the printer-artist relationship and the collaborative space sets up a dynamic arena for furthering diversity. Collaboration engenders community and equality by allowing artists and printers with a spectrum of abilities and backgrounds to work together, to gain inspiration from each other and build off of their collective capacity. This kind of relationship empowers printers and workshops to increase the voice of intersectionally marginalized artists, including neurodiverse and disabled artists. The master printer role can offer artists the opportunity to work in a new medium, but it can also arguably offer an extension of their physical capacity. Next slide, please. Okay, so up on this slide, we have the 4 women artists highlighted in the show at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego. And this is a really good starting place for us. But having said that, at that time, all the printers were men. And I do love this photo with all of the printers wearing their funny glasses. I just wanted to share a little anecdote, which is that when I first met Sydney Felsen, co-founder of Gemini, he proudly showed me the portraits of Gemini's strong roster of female powerhouse artists, Analia Saban, 𝘚𝘵𝘰𝘮𝘰 𝘠𝘵𝘰𝘮𝑒, Julie Moretu, Tacita Dean, and Hamilton. He has photos of them all set up almost like a little shrine in his office. And he also noted proudly to me, look, the litho crew is all women. So it's really heartening to see so many women printers now leading the way in contemporary printmaking, not just opportunities for female artists, but also behind the scenes, women doing the work. And if we go to my final slide, I just have a selection of photos. This is only a handful of the many incredible women artists and printmakers and printers who are making work together out there at Tamarind Institute and at Crow's Shadow Institute, Milestone Graphics, Deb Cheney Editions. So I just wanted to leave with this collection of photos and celebrate how far we've come since Tamarind opened, since Gemini opened. But certainly there's a lot more work to be done, and there's a lot more broadening of access that ought to happen. So I'm looking forward to talking more about that with my other panelists. And thank you so much to Alana for providing this platform for us.
Thank you, Sarah. And now if I can ask everyone to put on their camera so we can join for a conversation. Thank you everyone for your presentations. You know, I think a couple of things, there were a lot of commonalities, like I think we all discussed prior to this, that this would be kind of an organic conversation. But I think first I really want to underscore this idea of collaboration, which is, you know, we all talked about that, or you all talked about this in your conversation. and diversity, you know, certainly with women and gender, but then diversity to be understood as ability. And I think this is something really important, Sarah, that you had a great point of, and something that we discussed, which I hope you can kind of elaborate on, is that diversity in print has, especially with printers, in terms of gender, is now changing. But then as there are still not many BIPOC printers, master printers, but your decision to work specifically with neurodiverse artists is a decision that you make as a printer. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. I think that is something quite rare and important as a choice one makes as part of this process.
Sure. I mean, I have had the joy of working with a studio based in Sydney, Studio A, when I was living at home, which was a really transformative experience for me. This studio is a supported studio space for neurodiverse artists. And first and foremost, it selects very good artists. There are a handful of 8 artists, I think. Most of the time they have 8. And what's celebrated is the work, and they're not defined by their neurodiversity per se, but having the opportunity to work alongside those artists and understand how a space like that can function inspired me when I was during my Tamarind training, considering what I would do if I were to pursue my own collaborations and have some agency around who I would choose to work with. I see not only is it an opportunity for me to use my own access and my own training and skill to provide that opportunity to artists who may not have the opportunity to do so themselves, but also, a lot of those artists are just making brilliant work. Like, I want to work with them, and that's sort of a very important thing to highlight too, because I think it can get lost in conversation that, oh, this is charitable in some way, but that's really not where I'm coming from with it. It's like, this is a privilege for me equally as it is, hopefully, a good experience for them. And so I do work at Gemini, but I have long-term goals of having my own studio space, and that's something I think is a really important thing to incorporate into a business model if you have the opportunity to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And I think something else that you mentioned is this idea of this conversation, that it's a reciprocal relationship. And perhaps Diana and Marvella can speak a little bit more to this, but when I was initially doing my research for Experiments on Stone, another plug to go see it, there's some nice archival conversations that are interesting, where artists sat in a room with master printers and other printers, and how this collaboration with printers ended up changing the work itself. And so I would like to hear a little bit more about, Diana, of course, so much of this archive and how this has changed, but Marvella, you being in the studio physically, with the artists, it would be curious to hear a little bit more about all of that.
Yes, I think it also has to do with the experience that the artist comes with the process, right? But that doesn't mean that they, for my 2 years in the studio, I haven't seen one artist or met one artist that has been like, this is my image and that's what we're going to have. They've been, as the colors come through, evolutions have happened from that point of taking it to a different direction. So Dewey and Sarah brought that topic of like, as well as the skill of printing, as well, that emotional communication and human to human or people skills and relationship is important. And that's the key that Dewey is just really fantastic. And he's able to support the idea and really not compromise the artist's vision, but help grow and elevate that vision to another level, especially with artists that are not familiar with the medium. And with that, Dewey has shared, and I think I've heard that from other master printers, that they themselves also grow with that experimentation process. Each print is a new challenge, and so that ongoing conversation, I think that is what Sarah mentioned, that personality, that the master printer has to have that personality, then not to let their own ego get in the way. It's not about their vision, it's about supporting and really growing. And sometimes they come across these accidental mistakes that end up being this wonderful artwork, and completely different direction. So yeah, I've seen that happen many times, and then I have also seen where they're like, okay, start all over. Yeah.
And I think, Diana, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about this, and perhaps Sarah, with technical knowledge, you can speak about this. But the idea of the accident, right? Because lithography can be quite unforgiving as a medium, for those of you that don't know. And so I am curious to hear, because Tamarind, especially in this first decade that we're thinking about, was incredibly experimental, right? The whole purpose was to push lithography kind of past this stuffy, perhaps, origins. And purposefully, June Wayne smartly brought in artists that were sculptors like Louise Nevelson or weavers to kind of negotiate the limits of the medium. And yet, and many of it turned into great experimentation, but there, of course, was a process there. So I wonder, Diana, if you can speak a little bit more about that kind of experimentation and how that's really changed into Tamarind's history now.
Yeah, no, it's true that that we invite a certain amount of chaos, a certain amount of experimentation, and it really is in once the artist and the printer or the printers find a certain dynamic, usually the work might take a completely different tack. I mean, the artist may have come in with a plan and even some sketches and ready to start working. But once they're in the medium, especially if they're not familiar with the medium, once they're in it for a few days, usually the plan goes out the window, and the printers kind of work with the artist to capture what they're responding to right then in that moment. Mm-hmm. There are lots of examples of, well, especially just one thing that I think is really important to kind of contrast is that in the first decade, the decade that you've highlighted in your exhibition, the artists were working with these huge teams of printers. I mean, sometimes 7 or 8 printers, mm-hmm. and that is unheard of. I mean, maybe at Gemini, but I mean, at Tamarind, it's usually 1 or 2 printers working with the artist. Our master printers leading the collaboration, and then there's usually 1 or 2 apprentices that are working alongside her. And that dynamic, that exchange between those personalities, I think I can't quite imagine how those projects came about with so many printers and so much dialogue. And it'd be kind of interesting to look back through the archives with that in mind of, mm-hmm. of what the dynamics or the influences may have been. But yeah, in terms of experimentation, we definitely invite artists who are new to the medium, artists who don't even pick up a pen, or they don't draw. We invite just a real range of creative approaches, and sometimes artists who have no background in the art form are going to take the biggest risks in a way, because they don't know that they're breaking any rules. They just kind of jump in. So yeah. And Sarah, having recently graduated from our program, can compare and contrast workshop environments. But I mean, you were used to working with a certain amount of just human energy around you, with lots of 8 students and visiting artists and so forth. But on our professional side of the workshop, we try to keep it a little bit quieter during those collaborations with artists, just so they can have privacy and work through their ideas. But yeah, a crowded environment yields a certain amount of creativity as well. So
yeah, I think artists all need something a little bit different, but that is certainly the skill of a printer. And I really feel that being a good collaborative printer is quite like being a translator. Like, I know this language and I hopefully know the artist language too, or I'm gonna get to know it over the course of working with an artist. And my goal is to honor their intent and to bring that to fruition as authentically as I can, with their vision in mind, and with my skills just to support that. And so I think Marvella pointing out putting your ego aside, that is absolutely essential in being a successful printer, a collaborative printer. It's interesting to think about the early days, because I do think that some of the master printers in these big name workshops, including some of the printers at Tamarind, but also Gemini, Ken Tyler, these printers were characters in and of themselves, and I do think to an extent the ego was a positive contributing factor to some of those collaborations that happened. But we're also now in a very different time with very different artists, and it's a necessarily reformed way of working. But in terms of experimentation, I do love working with artists that just know nothing about lithography, because they say, can we do this? And you're like, well, can you do that? Maybe. And we were taught at Tamarind, always say yes. So I think it's wonderful to work with artists that don't know print, and maybe they're not even 2D artists primarily, and they will approach things in a totally different way, and they will expand your own thinking, because lithography is very technical, and I could imagine it becoming cumbersome if you're only ever exposed to the technique side of things. But yeah, it's a constant surprise. Yeah, and I think also if you make a mistake when you're proofing, the artist will most likely love that mistake and want you to make that a part of their print. So be careful. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for your time. I think we're out of time. Audience, if you had any questions, feel free to email us, and I can pass them along. Thank you to everyone for their great presentations. Especially, it's just so nice to hear about print. And I think what we learned today, I think what many people don't realize is how collaborative it is as a medium. And of course, how democratic it is as a medium, how easily disseminated, as Marvella talked about, and the importance of the medium being able to reach our communities more broadly. So thank you everyone for your insights. To our audience, we have recorded this conversation. We'll be posting to our channels. Thank you to Sarah, who will be transcribing our conversation to make our talk more accessible. So thank you for that. If you would like to visit it, again, we'll post in a couple of weeks. If you haven't already, please do visit the digital exhibition, Experiments on Stone, at mcasd.org/EOS. Finally, we have one additional program as part of Experiments on Stone. We will be hosting a Made by X with 𝘧𝘬𝘮𝘳𝘰𝘮𝘦, master printer and manager at the print studio at the Athenaeum Art Center in Logan Heights. For more information, please do visit our website. Until then, thank you all. This was fantastic. It was great to see all of you here virtually, and I'm glad that we could do this tonight.
Thank you. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, good night all.
Good.